Today, I want to talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. I want to talk about the United States. I also want to talk a little bit about Congress repealing the Iraq war, because I know that you have feelings and thoughts about that war and what we did within that country. But real quick, his belief that before the Olympics last year, Putin went to China and basically got permission and the unofficial backing of China to go ahead and launch this special military operation against Ukraine. He believes that China would back them and support them through purchases, but to the media and the world, they would say we're neutral. What are your thoughts? Was China more involved in the pre-war discussion before Putin fired the first bullet?
Well, I believe that China's been a uninvited guest to this conflict from the very beginning. I'll give you an example, and I know Ray will agree with me here because I've heard Ray speak about this often. In June of 2021, when Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden met in Geneva, Switzerland for their summit, when the summit ended, Joe Biden, unprompted, I mean, there was no question. He basically said that he would advise Putin to reconsider his relationship with China. That China is a big country, that their economy is big, and that Russia has much to fear from China, and that Russia should be gravitating towards the West. This shows the mindset that exists in the United States, and it gives away a couple things. One, the total lack of reality that exists in Washington, D.C. about the nature of the Russian-Chinese relationship. Relationships are built in a number of ways, but meaningful relationships are always built upon personal relationships. And when you have a Russian president and a Chinese president who celebrate their birthdays together, they make, I think there's a famous video of them making, pancakes together or dumplings. This is something far more significant than, for instance, the relationship between Barack Obama and Angela Merkel, which was a famously close relationship, except for the fact that Barack Obama ordered the National Security Agency to spy on the cell phone communications of Angela Merkel, exposing the fact that there was no true friendship between the United States and Germany. I can pretty much guarantee that Putin doesn't spy on the communications of Xi, and Xi doesn't spy on the communications of Putin, that this is a personal relationship that's reflective of the fact that Russia and China understand that together they grow stronger. And so this is a relationship that predates the conflict in Ukraine. And the reason why I bring that up is that Putin didn't have to go to Beijing to seek permission. First of all, when you're dealing with communications between national leaders, even leaders that are friendly, like Putin and Xi, nothing happens on the spur of the moment. Vladimir Putin simply doesn't get on an airplane and fly to Beijing and throw something on the table that Xi hasn't heard before. And what I'm trying to get at is before that February 4th meeting where they came up with a 5,000 word joint statement, that alone should give away something. You don't craft a 5,000 word joint statement right there on the whim. Okay, bring in the stenographer, we're going to dictate right now. That thing was crafted months in advance, had been coordinated closely between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia and the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so that when the two leaders met, they knew what they were going to say, they knew what was going to happen. So Putin didn't go there to seek permission. Putin went there at the invitation of the Chinese leader to create a joint presence of cooperation. Now, did Putin adjust his timeline based upon Chinese considerations? Absolutely. I think there's no doubt that China made it clear that they would prefer that Russia not initiate a special military operation or an invasion, however you want to call it, before the Olympics ended. And of course, that's what Russia did. They respected that. But that wasn't a decision made in Beijing on February 4th. That was a decision made back when Russia exhausted its diplomatic outcomes back in January, when the United States turned their back on the Russian efforts to have a negotiated settlement, refusing to read and consider the draft treaties Russia put on the table. At that point in time in January is where Russia communicated with China saying, we have no choice. And the Chinese were saying, we understand, but we need timing. But they also said, we're willing, we should get together and put out a joint statement that makes it clear to the world that there is no separation between the two of us, that we're both on this journey together. So I agree with Ray that that this was something that was this is representative of a partnership. I think Ray, I think if Ray was here today, he'd agree with me that this wasn't about Putin seeking permission. This was about a long-standing relationship where an understanding is regimed. Remember, this is an alliance. It's not an alliance, first of all. A relationship that's stronger than an alliance. And one of the reasons is, yes, alliances commit you to things, but it's also restraining. Alliances are like a cage. They also limit you. When you don't have an alliance, there's no treaty with words that tell you what you can, your left and right limits. The Russian-Chinese relationship is unlimited. It can go any direction it wants to, as far as it wants to, or as narrow as it wants to, and there's no misinterpreting what's going on because there are no limits. And that's the unique aspect of this relationship.
Okay. Switching gears, Bakhmut, Ukraine continues to be a big story in the media. It continues to be a big deal for Russia and a big deal for Ukraine. Russia is now saying we've taken enough of Bakhmut to confidently say we've conquered the city. One of the top Russian leaders held up the flag, I believe, at the city's capital. Do you believe that Bakhmut has fallen? And if not, what is the next move? What should we expect out of that battle?
Well, I think we can look in history at people counting their eggs before they hatch, so to speak. Ask the Germans, did Stalingrad fall when they only had 100 meters left of beachhead being defended by the Soviets on the western bank? Any general, anybody looking at that would say, well, we've pushed them, we've crushed them, we've got them narrowed in. Stalingrad has fallen. We've taken the administrative building. We're in control. Stalingrad has fallen. Stalingrad hadn't fallen. The Russians held on. They reinforced, etc. So I'm a little hesitant to claim victory before you actually have victory. Look at the Battle of the Bulge. The 101st Airborne was surrounded in Bastogne. The Germans had every reason to believe that they had an airborne division surrounded, defeated. But when the general was asked to surrender, he said nuts. And they held on. Patton relieved them, and the battle went the other way. So again, I don't have a dog in this hunt. It's not like I care one way or the other of the outcome. I think Russia is winning the Battle of Bakhmut. I think Russia has captured the administrative center of Bakhmut. I think psychologically, Russia can say that the trajectory is leading towards the decisive defeat of the Ukrainian army in Bakhmut. But the last time I checked, there were Ukrainian soldiers still dug in fighting. So the battle isn't over. And I'm not one to declare victory before you've rounded up the last prisoner, killed the last soldier, taken the last building. I think Russia's going to win this battle. But I don't know why they're declaring victory in advance. There's some heavy fighting left. And the problem about declaring victory too soon is that as the fighting continues, people say, wait a minute, I thought you won. I thought you said this battle was over, and yet it continues. So I don't agree with that assessment, but then again, I'm not Russian, and my opinion doesn't matter.
Okay, so too early to call. Okay, because each side is still claiming that they're in control, but Russia kind of officially came out and said, based on us taking the capital, they're seeing that as defeat. But again, the Ukrainian army, they're fighting like warriors. They're still dug in. They're still trying to hold that ground. Colonel Macgregor had kind of alluded to the fact that they've got this cauldron where it's basically nearly surrounded, but they're allowing Ukraine to continue to drive people in, almost like a big booby trap, where if they're going to keep walking soldiers into this battle, they're going to not basically collapse and take the whole city. What are your thoughts on that?
I have the highest regard for Colonel Macgregor and his experience and his analytical capabilities, and he's proven to be extraordinarily valuable resource in trying to understand this conflict. But I'd love to sit down with the colonel over a beer and just say that, look, I can tell you as a Marine, the idea of telling my Marines, take that hill and dig in so the enemy can keep coming into this battle so we keep fighting the battle is the dumbest thing in the world. I'm not calling Colonel Macgregor dumb. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that warriors want to close with and destroy their enemy through firepower and maneuver. And if I'm dug in, I need to move forward. I need to fight. I think the Russians haven't closed the cauldron, not because they don't want to close the cauldron. It's because Ukrainians are fighting like cats and dogs to prevent them from closing the cauldron. I just don't understand the notion of. I have yet to see in modern history where an enemy is seeking a double envelopment and then stops. They don't stop willingly. If you're going to seek a double envelopment, if you've suffered all those losses building these arms up, you want them to come together. And the fact that they're not coming together means the Ukrainians are just dumping reserves in there. Now, it's achieving the result that Colonel Macgregor speaks of. The end result is the same. The Ukrainians are throwing in resources and they're getting chewed up. There's no doubt about that. But I hesitate to say that that's by design on the part of Russia, because the warrior's instinct isn't to sit there and get shelled. The warrior's instinct, especially an outfit like Wagner, is to get up, move, close with, destroy, and kill. And I just imagine that that's what Wagner's trying to do. And every day you see incremental advances, so they're doing that. It's just the Ukrainians are just fighting hard. They're putting a lot of reinforcements in there. And in the end, I think they're going to be defeated, and the defeat will be catastrophic in nature because of the amount of troops that they poured in. The numbers that they're going to lose when this battle's over are going to be mind-boggling for most people. But I just don't see the Russians sitting back smoking cigars and saying, come on into this trap. I see the Russians fighting, just like the Ukrainians are fighting. But it's proving to be very hard to bring those pincers in.
Okay. Yeah. No, and this is why I like to bring on different guests, because everybody has a little bit of a different perspective to try to help us understand, because we're not there.
No, we're not there.
Yeah, we're not there, thank goodness. And we hope that this conflict will end soon. But thank you for the feedback on that. Do you believe that? So President Zelensky said in an interview where he was speaking in English that two things are happening. Basically, he needs to hold Bakhmut in order to show that Ukraine can hold its ground with all of the money and weapons that have been given to them. On the other side, he says Putin and Wagner desperately need to win this because they have this other audience of Latin America, of China, of India, of other parts that support Russia. And so he's saying that this battle is actually much bigger than what Lloyd Austin is willing to admit. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with Zelensky 100%. This battle is much bigger than Lloyd Austin is able to publicly admit. No, Lloyd Austin knows the truth. He's not stupid, and he's advised by some very capable military professionals. And they understand that when any military throws 30% of their combat capacity into a single battle, that this is a decisive battle, probably the decisive battle of the war. Zelensky said something other too. He said it's not just about the resources, but if he loses this battle, if he surrenders Bakhmut, he will be placed under tremendous pressure to negotiate a end to this conflict that won't be to the satisfaction of Ukraine. They'll have to give away territories, concede everything. But he said that the Ukrainian people will lose heart if they lose Bakhmut. Well, newsflash, Mr. Zelensky, you're going to lose Bakhmut. That's going to happen. But I do disagree with Zelensky and his, he's mirror imaged the pressure that he's receiving from the West onto Putin. I can guarantee you that Putin's receiving no pressure from Latin America, Africa, China, or anywhere else to influence the pace of the battle. The Russians are fighting a conflict that's outcome oriented, not driven by a calendar. Zelensky is very much driven by a calendar. There's a lot of pressures being placed because every day means more money, more resources that have to be committed by the West to helping them sustain this conflict. The Russians are just in the business of killing Ukrainians, and business is really good right now, tragically speaking. But Russia's under no pressure. That's something that Zelensky has mirror imaged onto Putin. But I think Putin has made it clear from the start to his generals that he has set out some objectives, and their goal is to achieve those objectives. And there's no timeline linked to it. You just do it as you need to do it, hopefully with the minimal number of casualties. But this is bloody business. Both sides are losing a lot of guys.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about NATO for a minute. Many years ago, the United States and others promised that NATO would not expand 1 inch closer to Russia. They've since added multiple countries. Then they start talking about adding Ukraine. Putin's, ears perk up. He's under the belief that this won't happen with the Minsk Accords and different things like that. Now this battle's going on. Now we're looking at Sweden and Finland, which are higher up, up north by like St. Petersburg, Russia. They're talking very seriously about joining NATO. Is there going to be a military operation against them, or do they not see them as a threat like they did Ukraine?
No, that's a good question. Ukraine is essential to the existential survival of Russia. There's unique geographical areas, there's religious, there's cultural, there's ethnic, there's a whole host of things that ties Ukraine to Russia that Finland doesn't have. The Russians, because of Finnish and Swedish neutrality, Russia has not committed military resources into that area because there was no need to. Now that Finland and Sweden are joining, what Russia has said is, if you're a member of NATO, you're a member of NATO. Article 5 protections apply. So Russia's not going to attack a member of NATO, thereby engendering a conflict with NATO. But they said that the free ride is over. To give you an example, Sweden, with a standing army of 18 to 20,000, is now have to deal with the fact that the Russians are building a 70,000 strong army corps in Karelia that will not only shield St. Petersburg from any incursion out of Finland, but also puts Helsinki, the capital of Finland, at risk, meaning that if there's a conflict, the Finns are going to lose their capital city because they've got nothing to stop the Russians. So Finland's going to have to now double down, and they're going to have to start building a military with resources they don't have. And Russia has said that if Finland wants to maintain its current level of military activity, fine. But if they start bringing NATO infrastructure into Finland, that changes the strategic picture, and then Russia will have to respond accordingly. That doesn't mean that Russia is going to attack, but it means that Russia has to accrue military capability that can neutralize and defeat whatever NATO brings in. And so we're going to see an escalation of tensions in that area, but it doesn't automatically translate to war. Nobody wants a direct war between NATO and Russia because it could lead to nuclear conflict. But what it means is that we have a new level of instability that didn't need to occur. There's no reason for Finland and Sweden to join NATO. Russia posed no threat to them whatsoever. And if you look at it from a logical standpoint, their national security posture is actually worsened because now they've become attached to an alliance that has said that they are in strategic conflict with Russia, which means they are now in strategic conflict with Russia when they weren't previously, which means they're going to have to put down hundreds of billions of dollars investment into military that otherwise didn't need to be spent. And I don't know about you, but I can imagine better ways to spend $100 billion, like on healthcare, on education, on infrastructure, than pouring into a military that can never be used because a war with Russia would mean nuclear war and we're all going to die anyways.
Okay. So they're maybe unnecessarily joining NATO out of pressure, because if there was no bad blood between the two countries and no need to attack, they can trade. It just seems like, again, NATO, maybe the United States, is pushing to do like a cauldron around Russia, where, now NATO's on multiple borders instead of just a threat from, having Ukraine be bordered up against Russia as a NATO nation.
No, there's no look. This extends NATO's frontage with Russia by 810 miles. So if you take a look at the map, I mean that's a long border between Finland and Russia. I think we have to understand too the history between Finland and Russia, and Sweden. Finland, 200 years ago was Swedish and then Russian, then Swedish and Russia. And at the time of the First World War, Finland was a largely autonomous part of the Russian Empire. But when the Russian Revolution took place, Finland broke away, and Russia respected that. Russia said, "Okay, we're not going to demand that you remain part of us." And so Finland developed sort of as when I say pro-white, they were sympathetic to the former monarchy. They're not pro-Bolshevik. They're not pro-communist, which allowed them to align themselves with Germany, etc. In 1939, there was a winter war fought because the Russians felt threatened by the Finnish presence near Leningrad. In the winter war, Finns fought hard, but eventually the Russians compelled them to surrender in early 1940. In 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, Finland joined and participated in the siege of Leningrad, where 1 million Soviet citizens died. And they fought alongside Nazi Germany. When the war ended, Finland surrendered, and Russia, rather than occupying them and absorbing them, as they should have probably done, they said, we'll let you be independent, but you need to be neutral forever. We can no longer allow you to become a base for Nazi Germany coming in and threatening Leningrad. What has Finland done? From the perspective of Russia, NATO is a threat. NATO is engaged in what NATO describes as a strategic conflict against Russia designed to achieve strategic defeat of Russia. So Finland has now joined this alliance. And with its history of joining alliances and allowing their territory to be used as a jumping off point to invade Russia, the Russians have every right to be concerned about this. And so I think, a lot of people look at this and say, well, that's just Putin being Putin, the Russians being bullies and all this stuff. Given Finland's track record, this was really one of the dumbest things they've ever done.
Okay. Speaking of dumb things that countries have done, the U.S. Senate voted to finally, I don't know the exact language, but basically finally withdraw Congress's permission for money to be used towards the Iraqi war. I know that you had some direct involvement in the weapons of mass destruction lie and Colin Powell. Could you maybe give just a brief history of your role in that? And then what are your thoughts on Congress voting on this new measure?
Sure. I mean, my relationship with the Iraq conflict actually goes back to the early years of my involvement in the Marine Corps. I was assigned to a Marine Corps brigade, the 7th Marine Amphibious Brigade. That was the Marine Corps component of the Rapid Deployment Force, part of the Carter Doctrine of being prepared to intervene in the Middle East in case of a Soviet incursion or some instability to protect oil. And so I was an analyst of the Iran-Iraq war. I spent a lot of time studying both the Iranian military and the Iraqi military. I bring that up because in August 1990, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, I was taken out of my professional level school and assigned to the Commandant of the Marine Corps as part of a operational planning cell to plan military operations against Iraq in the lead up to Desert Storm. I ended up being attached to General Norman Schwarzkopf's headquarters, where I played an active role in hunting Iraqi Scud missiles during the Gulf War. It was that military experience, when combined with my prior experience as a weapons inspector in the Soviet Union, that made my resume attractive to the United Nations Special Commission, which was created in the aftermath of the war, tasked with getting rid of weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, nuclear, long-range ballistic missiles. So I was brought in to create an intelligence capability for the United Nations, and later that turned into an operational capability to carry out inspection, searching. I did that job for 7 years. And so I was probably better positioned than almost anybody in the world to know the truth about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction program and the threat it posed to the United States. And long story short, when the Bush administration was making its case for war in 2002, I was a vocal opponent, saying that while we could not certify that Iraq was fully disarmed, whatever Iraq could have retained does not constitute a threat worthy of war, and that the Bush administration must be able to back up its claims of Iraqi capability with facts. And void of those facts, I have to rely upon the fact set I know, which says there is no threat. This is why when Colin Powell gave his presentation before the Security Council on February 5th of 2003, I immediately said that everything he said was a lie, and it turns out that everything he said was a lie, because it was just made up. And we went to war on a lie. Congress gave permission to invade Iraq, essentially, based upon a non-existent threat posed by weapons of mass destruction. Then they redefined the conflict as not about eliminating WMD or eliminating Saddam because he was gone, but about promoting democracy. And then we extended this conflict in 2014 as an anti-ISIS conflict when ISIS sprang out of the Syrian desert, et cetera. And there's been a lot of people who have said that, the current military posture of the United States in Iraq and in Syria lacks constitutional authority, that the existing war powers authorities were insufficient to justify legally the force. I will have to be honest, I have to read the new congressional legislation more clearly to find out what it said. But what I think is probably happening is that they are divorcing the present reality from the past, that they're no longer trying to stretch the imagination of Americans into believing that the authority granted in 2003 is somehow applicable in 2020.